So it's been a long time since a Canadian franchise has hoisted the Stanley Cup. In fact, it hasn't happened since 1992 when the Montreal Canadiens won their last Stanley Cup. Now today I want to talk about every Canadian franchise and what their odds are to win the Stanley Cup this season or even make the playoffs. So let's start with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now this team was supposed to be the favorite to win the Cup this year. They made some amazing additions in the offseason, but it feels like some of those additions aren't panning out the way they thought, and also their defense has been struggling from injury, let alone the fact that their goaltending is still a bit shaky even with the addition of Joseph Woll. This team still has a few question marks, but I feel like they'll work all of that out as the season goes along. I do think Toronto has one of the better shots to reach the Stanley Cup Finals this year, but do they have enough edge to get them there? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Next up is the Edmonton Oilers, the other favorite team to go to the Stanley Cup this year. This team has struggled out of the gate. They've already fired their head coach, and a lot of their players are just not meeting expectations. McDavid has struggled to start the year, and the team sits with a losing record about 5 weeks in. I'm not saying that the Oilers season is completely over and that their hopes are gone, but my confidence in this team is very shaky right now, and I can't even imagine them getting past the first round in the playoffs. Moving over to the other team in Alberta, the Calgary Flames have not impressed me this season. Since losing Gaudreau and Tkachuk, it just feels like this team is on the downswing. Last year they didn't perform to their standards, and this year I would be very surprised if they make the playoffs. They're benching their $10 million players. They can't get scoring from their lines, and everybody's now asking for a trade to get out of there. It's not a good look over in Calgary. I would be very surprised if they get the playoffs, but their peak is going to be a wild card team that maybe gets into the first round. Next up is the Winnipeg Jets, a team that I think is a little bit underrated. Their roster is really solid, and they finally re-signed Hellebuck and Scheifele to some questionable deals, but I do like the additions of those guys. Winnipeg is one of those teams where I feel like if they can just get into the playoffs, we might be able to see them get a little bit further than people probably first predicted. But do I see them winning a Stanley Cup this year? It really just depends on if they can get hot goaltending and if their team continues to play the way that they have been. A slow start for the Jets, but they've seemed to turn things around, so expect some good things coming out of Winnipeg this season. Next up is the Ottawa Senators. This team was one of my favorites to go into the season. I expected them to make that jump into the playoffs. I liked a couple of the additions they made in the offseason, but for some reason this team is being riddled with injuries and controversies that I think is going to hold them back this year and potentially even keep them out of the playoffs. Now right now they're in the bottom spot of the Atlantic Division, and if they can't turn things around, they could potentially not even make the playoffs this year when everyone expected them to. So do I see them winning a Stanley Cup? Not really, because I don't even see them making the playoffs. Next up is the Montreal Canadiens. I think we all can say the same thing, that the Canadiens are overperforming this season, and nobody really expected them to make the playoffs. In fact, a lot of people had them in the bottom of the Atlantic Division to finish out this year, and even though their future is going to be really bright, I just don't see Montreal winning this year. They lost one of their key players to injury for the entire season, and I expect them to regress a little bit from their hot start, but I wouldn't be putting Montreal on the Stanley Cup Finals list anytime soon. And last but not least is the Vancouver Canucks, a team that I'm actually very high on right now. The start to their season has been fantastic, and they're getting great play from some of their best players, including Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, Brock Besser, and JT Miller. I mean, they have a Vezina caliber goalie, a Norris caliber defenseman, and a Hart Trophy favorite. This team looks great on all levels, and they're getting a bunch of depth scoring from some of their lines. I don't know if they're going to be able to reach the Stanley Cup Final this year. I do think that lack of experience is going to kind of keep this team from going to its full potential, but that's not to say that the future for Vancouver isn't incredibly bright. If this team keeps heading in this direction, I could see them winning a Stanley Cup within the next couple seasons, but this season I do think that the experience of playing in the playoffs is important, and that's something that this team lacks. So in my opinion, the team that I think has the best odds to win is Toronto. If their roster can stay healthy and if they can manage to improve on their defense and goaltending, the sky could be the limit for this team, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. What do you guys think though? Which Canadian franchise do you think has the best chance to win the Stanley Cup this season? Make sure you comment your thoughts below, like this video, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.